So in episode 50, we're talking to Dan Ibarra, and one of the things that we're talking about was Dan's process. And Dan's process is very kind of, I wouldn't say it's kind of reactive, but not in a bad way, but it's like he does one thing, he does another thing. He's got a high degree of trust in the process that as he tries and experiments, his brain will interpret and kind of turn the experiments into something fitting for a commercial project. That couldn't be further away from how I work, which isn't even a judgment. It's more about the idea that the point of figuring out process is not that you do this thing that somebody tells you to do. It's that you figure out what works for you so that you can make the best possible work. But one thing that we both had in common was that early on, we tried really hard to come up with ideas. And I think I've talked about this in videos before, but I had a lot of creative block. Like if you, there's a video called Isolating the Insight that's not in the daily vlog series. That's about an aspect of ideation that I didn't understand. It didn't really click with me until fairly recently. And understanding it, I can look back on old work and understand why I had creative block. So this thing that Dan and I talk about, which is that we both felt like we needed to come up with ideas. And I always say come up with ideas in quotes, and I say it kind of disparagingly, but the reality is I don't actually mean that. But the way that we often come up with ideas is we try and think really hard. And the problem with that is that the way to come up with ideas is about understanding ideation and research processes better. And that in doing so, ideas and concepts will come to you more naturally. And that's the big thing I didn't understand. Probably until 2012, I think, was when I started reworking my creative process and being a lot more intentional about it and developing processes that sort of guaranteed that I could come up with an idea. So the important thing then is not that you should have a meandering spiritual journey like Dan, or that you should have this bizarrely almost scientific approach like me, or have 4 different processes for different contexts. But it's to make sure that the way that you're doing things is the way that you want to be doing things, and that you're setting yourself up for success in doing that. Because what a lot of us do is we work in this conceptual mode where we come up with ideas, but because we don't have either a clear point of view on how that actually works, or a method for generating ideas and generating concepts that we can then turn into stuff, we fall back on styles, or we do these weird hacks to get stuff done. The big thing is there's nothing wrong with coming up with an idea and then sitting down and making that thing that you see in your head. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the only thing that can be a potential liability is if you haven't figured out how you get from the kickoff to making sure there's a picture in your head, or 5 pictures in your head. And that's the big challenge. That's the challenge for everybody. And I don't know how many people even really solve that. One thing that Dan and I talked about that night was this video it's a video of a talk by Michael Beirut. It's part of a Creative Mornings thing. He's talking about clients. And he talks about working on the Saks Fifth Avenue packaging. And it sounds like he says they'd been working on it for a couple months and didn't have any solid ideas. And my feeling is that that's total insanity. The only possible explanation for that is lack of a real point of view or perspective on where an idea comes from, a lack of a process that guarantees results. Now, far be it from me to tell Michael Beirut how to do his job, because at the very least, he knows how to get clients and get attention, and good for him. 10 years ago, If I heard somebody say Michael Beirut, like somebody like say Michael Beirut, say that they'd been working on a project for a while and were struggling to come up with a solid idea, I would have been like, oh, cool. That means that the struggles I have aren't unusual. They're just part of doing this, and I'll still have them even as I'm established in a career. But now I hear that and I just think like, that's fucking insane. There's no excuse for not being able to come up with an idea within a week. I'm not saying that's the best idea, but the notion that you'd work on something for 2 months, because that's what it sounded like to me in the video, and not have anything you were excited about, like that blows my mind. Because I feel like a project of that scope, I would think within, it depends on how we'd go about it, but I feel like within 3 weeks, we'd have 10 things we were pumped on. That's not because I'm a fantastic designer and Michael Beirut's a hack at all, right? But it's because I have a methodology and a process, and that process is not, oh, creativity is mysterious and you never know where inspiration will come from and hoobity blah blah. No, it's because it's like there's fucking steps. And one of the things that in reworking a creative process, the whole reason I wanted to do it was at some point I had the realization that the way I worked was based around luck. The luck of seeing the right thing, the luck of reading the right thing, the luck of being in the right mental space to see a connection between two things or to have an idea. And that's not a very getting bit. That's not a stable way to work. That's how I look at it. In the same way that I don't think like my mood should go up and down, and I don't think my finances should go up and down. I don't think my creative abilities should go up and down. I think every day that I work should be productive and end with something I'm excited about, and that if it doesn't, then I'm doing something wrong. So I definitely made lots of stuff where like it wasn't working yet, and you get more time or whatever. But and I used to chalk that up as just being part of the game. Like sometimes it just doesn't quite come together the way that you want it to, and it has nothing to do with the client. It's just like it doesn't click or whatever. And I choose now to view that as a symptom. The same way that I view creative block as a symptom, I view self-doubt as a symptom, I view coming up with ideas at the last minute as a symptom. I view the idea that your creative work wouldn't more or less be 99% of the projects turn out amazingly, 1% some shit goes awry, and it's the client's fault. That's like the ratio that I'm like shooting for, and it's not, again, because I'm a genius or super smart. I just think that I have a perspective on how to make sure that when I start at the beginning, I'm going to guarantee I get somewhere at the end that's worth getting to. And at the absolute least, there's not going to be creative block or self-doubt. If those things happen, I know that I'm doing something wrong. I'm thinking something wrong, or I'm physically doing something wrong, or I'm skipping a step. And all of this is a long-winded way to say that there's not a right way or a wrong way to do things. Like, you don't have to be meandering, you don't have to be methodical, but that you owe it to yourself to figure out how to make sure that you consistently get the results you desire. Whether that is that when you present work to the client, it's the one version and it's the masterpiece, and how do you guarantee that between the kickoff and the first presentation, you will arrive at the masterpiece? It shouldn't be luck, it shouldn't be inconsistent. If that's your modus operandi, you should be hitting that mark every fucking time and not needing extensions or any of that. And if you're not, but that's the model you're using, then you go like, okay, cool. What's happening between here and here that keeps me from delivering a masterpiece every time? And the real way to do that is you look at when it did work and you go, okay, cool. What were those steps? And that's it. And then as you start to do that, as you start to really analyze and hone in on that process stuff, the degree to which it will like open things up and kind of blow your mind, it's really profound. Like, so much of how I'm able to see things and see why projects tank just came from this really simple thing of one day having the realization of what I do is utterly unpredictable, and I'm not sure I get to the best results possible, but I also don't think I can become a better designer. Like, marginally, I think I can improve, because I'm like, but I'm basically who I am. And so the idea was like, well, let's at least do something that generates a broader range of ideas to work from. And to do that, I'll have to do more research. But then once I started doing that, like, it was like this thread. I just kept pulling. More and more stuff popped out of it. So, suddenly you realize, like, you know what? The normal way that I've been working for 15 years or whatever, that is really only works for a small subset of projects. These methods are actually, the default method I've been using really doesn't serve most of my projects. And there's just stuff I do in classes that actually would be perfect for the art gallery with no budget. But it came from just looking at what I was doing and analyzing it and deciding that inconsistency was bad. Like, I would think that if every day I left my house and I drove to my office, and if 3 out of those 5 days I made it to the office, and 2 out of those 5 days I ended up in St. Paul, I'd probably assume that I actually don't know what the fuck I'm doing, right? So I apply that same logic to graphic design. If 3 out of 5 projects end with a satisfactory response, and 2 of them are disasters or mediocre, or I feel like I didn't deliver, I'm not chalking that up to a baseball kind of batting average thing. There's no physical demands here, you know what I mean? I'm going to chalk that up on what did I do on those 2 that's not as good as the 3? What did I do that was different, or what didn't I do that held it up? Or what was I thinking? Like, was I super attached to, this needs to be good, we need to knock this out of the park? Because that's like a really common one that fucks people up. So this video ended up being so much longer than I wanted it to, but I hope that gives you some insight. If that consistency is something that you struggle with, reach out. Like, send a message or send an email or leave a comment, and we can, whether it's through the comments or through a phone conversation, figure out what's happening on the projects that aren't going well, or what's happening in the projects that are going well, and how can you just apply that to everything. All right, take it easy and have a good night.